Unresolved Problem segment tonight, the unintended consequences of millions of people entering the USA illegally. In the year 2005, there were nearly 17,000 murders in America, about 46 per day. Congressman Steve King from Iowa says that criminal aliens, both legal and illegal, were responsible for about 25% of those murders. Congressman joins us now from Washington. The data that you are pointing to is shocking, if it's true. But I don't know if it's true. Why don't you tell the folks how you arrived at the conclusion?
Well, first I began to ask the question at the testimony on our immigration subcommittee hearings on how many didn't make it across the desert. We lose about 300 a year. And I began to ask the question, how many Americans died at the hands of those that did make it across the desert? I commissioned a GAO study, and then it yielded these results. First of all, the study reports that 27%, but when you do the math on it, it comes out to 28% of the inmates in our federal penitentiaries are criminal aliens. And then they pay about 25% of the cost to the states for incarcerating criminal aliens, and that's in the report. And when you multiply that 25% across and divide it by about 22,000, which is the annual cost per inmate, you come up with about 28% in our state penitentiaries as well. There are a couple other ways to cross-reference that, but it comes down to 28% of our inmates in our penitentiaries are criminal aliens, and if they commit 28% of the crime and there's no evidence that they're committing less, then these numbers hold up, Bill.
All right,
and it is a shocking thing.
Drawing upon my Kennedy School of Government at Harvard background, here's where you're making your mistake, with all due respect. That you're assuming that the crimes that these, both legal and illegal, because it's interesting, Congressman, the federal government does not keep statistics about crimes committed by illegal aliens. And the reason they don't is because they don't want the folks to know how bad it is. That's a conscious decision not to keep those stats. So criminal aliens is what you're talking about, both legal and illegal. You're right, 28% of federal penitentiary inmates are criminal aliens. So you basically have that, but you can't say that the type of crimes they commit are all across the board, because they may be nonviolent offenders, they may be heavily into narcotics. You don't know if they are the most heinous criminals, the murderers and the rapists. You just don't know that.
Bill, it's true, and I've not represented that to be anything other than the way I've represented it to you on this program, but I would tell you that the groups of people that come into this country are generally the young men. And if you look at the crime demographics of that and recognize that in the United States we're about 4.28 criminal victims of violent crime per 100,000. Mexico is 13.2, 3 times as high. Honduras is 9 times the rate of the United States. Colombia is 15 times the rate of the United States. Every time I go back and try to cross-reference this and find a flaw, there are no statistics that support anything except my conclusion, and I recognize empirically one has to make a connection. But I'd challenge the people in this country, produce your own study, and in fact challenge the federal government, keep the records.
Well, the federal government should be doing this kind of research, because I think it's an enormous problem. And here's a very disturbing thing that you say. 8 American children are victims of sexual abuse by criminal aliens. Again, that's legal and illegal. Every day, about 3,000 a year. How did you get that?
That number is from a separate report that came out of one of our NGOs, and I'm reluctant to quote them until I could pull that back and give it to you exactly. But it's not my number. Non-government organization.
All right, so somebody that was commissioned by Congress to do a study came up with that number, and you don't want to say who it is?
I just don't recall the name. I don't want to quote them unless I know which government organization.
But you think the stat is solid?
Statistic.
You think
yes, I do.
3,000 American children a year molested by criminal aliens. You think that's a solid stat?
That number, I think, comes out to about 8 a day by my recollection. I do believe that's a solid number. I wouldn't have a problem finding that report, Bill.
All right.
But I tell you, American people, take a look at this. We are having about 3,000 people, it runs out to about 9,000 a year. If I'm off by half, that's still half again more than the victims of September 11th.
Absolutely. The federal government should look at this, and it's disgraceful we're at in this situation. Congressman, thanks very much for coming on. We appreciate it. A little more ahead is the fact